Hi, Josh. Welcome to the Bookaholic Podcast.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, glad to have you here. Now, today is one of those podcasts that I would term in the Writers Workshop
Hmm.
series. I've been
Yeah.
doing the Writers Workshop for about a year now, and we all know that avid readers are sometimes struggling writers.
Hmm.
And we just have a bent for the written word. And so some of us just actually try to go ahead and give ourselves a shot at writing a book, whether fiction or nonfiction.
Yeah.
And I found that a lot of folks like that need some guidance. And I've been very blessed to have so many people on this channel who have given every single book coach or ghostwriter or whomever I'm interviewing in that space, everybody gives a different piece of advice.
Yeah.
And so it goes to show you that you can't learn too much about writing and all of these
Oh,
processes. So
absolutely.
let's dive right into it. Now, let me just, and I hope that this information is right. You're a person that has ADHD and dyslexia, correct?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Which
Okay, and
certainly good.
go ahead.
Well, yeah. It's both of those things were diagnosed rather later in life. I was in my early 30s when I was diagnosed with ADHD, and it was during COVID. My
Mm.
youngest daughter came up to me and said, "Hey, Dad," she's 17, 16, 17 at the time. Said, "Hey, Dad, I think I'm dyslexic." I'm like, okay. And so I started doing some research, and it's very genetic. It is, and as I was reading this stuff, I was like, well, dang, I think I'm dyslexic. But for me,
Wow.
growing up, people always describe dyslexia as like letters moving on a page. That's how they talked about. And
Yeah.
because that's not me, and also because I'm a great reader, I didn't
Mhm.
even dawn on me. But it's kind of
Wow.
what I realize is the way I read is a coping mechanism for the dyslexia, which is I skim, I don't read. I
Oh.
when I look at a book, in most cases, I'm only seeing maybe 50% of the words on the page.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, and so what it means is, you have some people are more detail oriented, some people are more big picture. I'm definitely big picture. Between the
Mhm.
dyslexia and the ADHD, I'm not the guy you ever want proofreading something. I
Okay.
mean, my emails will routinely have not just missing letters, missing words, just gone. And
Wow.
but on the other hand, so I'm getting ready to interview a coaching client, and or we're going to be meeting for the next 2 days. So I'll have like 15 hours worth of conversation in my head, and I'll be able to hold it pretty well, and
Mhm.
be able to put together these pieces and find an entire arc for her memoir.
Right.
So the person who can do that typically isn't the person who's going to proofread your book. Um, so that's why it's key to know who you are, and there's in terms of
Right.
the writing advice is what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and don't beat yourself up for what you don't do well. Right?
Right. Right.
If
Right.
if big picture is hard for you, that's okay because you're probably a lot better at details than I am.
Yeah, yes. Well, so with that said, there's a couple of things I want to dive back into.
Hmm.
So, like you said, when I first heard of dyslexia, I think maybe somebody really famous, I don't know, Cher, I think is one of those folks
Yeah.
that said she had dyslexia.
Hmm.
And so, when you first heard of that, like you said, it was like people were transposing letters and things of that nature. That was a very simplified definition. But what is the full scale definition? You've given us a glimmer into
Hmm.
that, but what's a full scale definition of dyslexia? What, since you aren't a traditional dyslexia person, what were some of the other symptoms?
Well, so first of all, it's I won't I'm not an expert, so I'll put that caveat out there. But it varies a lot. I mean, each there's different things, but basically dyslexia has to do with there's a lot we don't even fully understand it, but there's theories having to do with basically the way the brain's wired. So it's not a disability; it's just that the brain is more attuned to patterns and bigger pictures, and less
Mm,
attuned to this fine details. And
okay.
so literally left and right I struggle with every time someone says turn right I have to think, wait, right, I write with my right hand, okay, this way, pretty much every time. If you show me a B and a P in context, I'll know which one it is. If you show me a B or a P just by itself as a letter, it will take me a moment to remember to read. Or actually, no, B and P is easy for me because it's upside down, but B and
Right.
D, sorry, um,
Yes.
I'm going to struggle. I'm going to have to think about it every time. So
Oh.
it's just that the fine details don't register. Um, but that's because you're seeing. But on the other hand, people are dyslexic frequently. There's different types and different things. And there's a book called the Dyslexia Advantage that I read a while back that's very helpful and talked about like there are different things like. And as I'm reading through these like 8 different things, some of them like, oh yeah, that's me. Some of them not so much. So like something my daughter and I, we both have a very good sense of place. Like we if I visit, if I were to come visit your house, spend
Mhm.
5 minutes walking through it, a month later I could map it out reasonably well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's just my brain remembers things, but I
Right.
might
Right.
not remember your name properly, how to spell your name. No, I won't remember
Right.
how to spell your name.
Right.
you know?
Right. Right. Wow. Okay. So now that you've given us that information, so how do you work with your clients knowing these things? Do you tell them up front that this is what you have, just in case whatever your feedback you give them that's written is missing some words, and then they're like, "Is
Mhm.
this the guy?"
Yeah, that's something I've realized. Yeah, that's really important that I let people know in advance because otherwise you look at it, it's like, uh, this guy's a professional writer. And the way I do explain is what I said about the big picture versus the fine detail. That the person
Right.
who can read, who can skim 100,000 words and keep them more or less in his head, is not the guy who's going to notice commas. And that's actually on my website.
Right.
I
Right.
say that
Oh,
up front. And also and furthermore in my contract I actually do say just know early drafts are going to be rough. This is what's going to happen, and I don't include proofreading or the final copy editing in my services. It's
right.
every ghostwriter does that differently, but my thing is no one should copy edit their own stuff. So if your book is traditionally published, they'll take care of that. If not, um, you're responsible to find one. The good news is that copy editors are a lot cheaper than I am. You
Yeah.
know, so
Yes.
yeah, so I just let people know uh, straight up front. And this is because I have a this is kind of my philosophy of life is really understanding. I'm a Christian, and within Christianity, the one of this big analogies is used of the body. That the body has all these different parts, and
Right.
each part plays a role, and that
Exactly.
was yeah. And so that's crucial, and I that just fits my philosophy for the world. I see a lot of academics or whatnot who will look down on a plumber or whatnot because I'm in my ivory tower, and for me, okay, I look up to the mechanical rock because he's doing stuff I can't do. She's doing stuff I can't do. I can't. My brain does not do that stuff, and I'm impressed that you actually enjoy accounting. I
Ex
can't understand that you like math. Whatever it is, uh, and so I guess I'm kind of rambling on, but that's the thing is
No, you're not, but because, when you said that, that just reminded me of an article I must have read, oh gosh, when I was, in my 20s, and it
Mhm.
was in Glamour magazine, if you ever heard of that,
I've heard of
but
it. Can't say I've
it
ever
was in
picked it up.
it was in Glamour magazine, and this person wrote an article about all the different types of intelligence
Yeah,
and
yeah,
geniuses. And they brought up like a mechanic. Like you said, people look down at some of these other positions and jobs, but
mhm,
like you said, I too am grateful for these folks that can do
yeah,
stuff that I have totally no interest or ability, even just the ability to do.
yeah.
So yeah, yeah, no, I know that's not our particular subject, but that is very true. Very
And
true.
the reason why I think it's valuable for people to understand to be comfortable in their own skin and happy with what they have. And this is a C.S. Lewis. I'm a huge C.S. Lewis fan, and his thing is basically is that humility um, is not thinking less of yourself, but it's thinking of yourself less. In
Right.
other words, not really caring about how you stack up against other people. Just know what you do and you do it well. And a little bit of a soapbox here, but like so intelligence is one of these things are that when you think of classic, does well on test intelligence, we tend to inflate, and people who are smart tend to think that they're better than people who aren't.
Right.
And I'm going off on a soapbox here, but it's because I'll be honest, I'm fairly clever. Yeah, I'm smart. I know stuff, but that doesn't make me any happier than someone who doesn't have the same IQ.
Right,
It's
right,
actually an
right,
article I read a while back where a guy basically recognized that he's by far and away the highest IQ in his family, but he wasn't the happiest. That
yeah,
his aunt, who was much more simple than he was, just lived a fuller life.
yeah,
And
yes,
so you look at that, it's like, yeah, okay, so I've got this skill. I have here's my IQ, whatever it is, I don't know. And oh, you're tall. Your hair's
right,
blonde. Okay, there it is.
right,
You know,
exactly,
and I
exactly.
just think, I guess I say all that to say to writers, it's so easy to think, okay, here's the writer who's write to the New York Times bestseller, or here, I've written about what 15 books by this point as a ghostwriter. It's like, okay, so
Mhm,
we've all done these things, and you can like say, oh, they're a special thing. No, they do a thing, and you do a different thing. But when it
mhm,
comes to writing, writing is about you bringing yourself to the page, and opening up. And so many things I could talk about why I love writing and how I try to coach people. But what I frequently try to do, whether it's as a writing coach or also I help people with speaking or whatnot, I'm looking for who is that person. And some people, their writing is going to be very fluid, very flowery, and all that, and it's going to sound good. Some people it's going to be very simple, straightforward, and that works as well. Stop
right.
comparing yourself to other people. Just write.
Exactly. Well, one of the reasons why my channel even exists is kind of like it's not one of the things that I say every day,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the fact that I want people to realize that there are good writers from every space, not just the
Mm-hmm.
ones that's on the New York Times bestsellers list,
Yeah.
because those on the New York Times bestsellers list have a lot of marketing and promotion behind them.
Mm-hmm.
And you can actually name them. You can actually
Yeah.
name them and rattle them off. We know who they
Yeah.
are, the James Pattersons, David Baldacci, Colleen Hoover, etc. Now, I'm not taking anything away from those people. I mean, I've
Right.
read some of their books and they are very good, but there's
Yeah.
other people who are self-published. They don't have the marketing dollars, but they may have a masterpiece book, and you might
Mm-hmm.
never hear about it until maybe I interview them on this channel.
Yeah. Exactly. It,
You
and
know,
such
so
a crucial thing is, and this is with every one of my clients or potential clients when I first meet with them. My first question is, what is your goal for the book?
mhm,
Or sorry, what's your purpose for the book? In other words, what you want the reader to take from it? What you want
right,
this book to be about? Then, what is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish for yourself?
right,
And
right,
it's
right,
vital to know that if your goal is to be able to share your history with your kids, that is an incredibly valid goal. Just know that that's what it is,
right,
and commit
right, right.
commit the appropriate resources. If your goal is, so you talk about self-publishing. A good friend of mine, he self-published a book on public speaking called "Speak with No Fear," and his book has done. He's made way more money off of his self-published book and sold far more copies than I ever did of my traditionally published book.
Right.
And
Yeah.
because it met a need, and it's a it's a he also wrote it in like 1/12 of the time I wrote mine, but he met a need, and he was is on point for what people needed. And so,
Yes,
and he
yes.
knew what he was doing. He knew what he wanted to accomplish, and he accomplished it. So that's my thing, is like, not every book should be an NYT bestseller,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, of course we
Exactly.
want it, but
Right.
I'd be lying if I said that. Oh, I don't care. No, of course I want the sales, but they don't all have to be.
Exactly, exactly. Well, so with let's just say taking it from the dyslexia,
Hmm.
with that, most people that suffer from that don't even want to read. They
Hmm.
certainly don't want to write. What even drew you into wanting to be a full-time ghostwriter?
Yeah.
How did you even come to that conclusion? Most people would definitely say, nah, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because so there's a ghostwriting podcast I listen to, and it's kind of funny. One of the things like all of them say is, no one grows up thinking, I want to be a ghostwriter when I grow up. You
Right.
know, it's just it's never been on anyone's radar. But
Right.
starting for myself, my family was a reading family. My dad, when he was in a book, it's like you could drop a pan on the floor next to him and he wouldn't hear it. And so it's just like reading was a normal thing. And again, because of my dyslexia, I didn't know what I was doing, but I taught myself to skim basically. And so every Friday would be library day at this school I went to in up here in Washington, and I would get a Hardy Boys book, and I'd read it over the weekend and return it on Monday. That's what I
Oh,
did
wow.
every weekend, and so I was just in the habit of reading a lot,
Yeah.
and the thought of, like, a lot of people are like, oh, I hope I want to be a professional athlete someday when I grow up. That thought never entered my head because I'm a lousy athlete.
Yeah.
I lack
Yeah.
hand-eye coordination and all these other things. But there was a little bit of that, like, oh, maybe that'd be fun. But I kind of just went away. Like, I never really
Yeah.
thought about it. It's like, I just took it as, like, oh, I want to be an astronaut type thing. I just dismissed it until I had
Right.
something I really wanted to say.
Right.
Um,
Right.
be, being a pastor, I was a pastor for 14 years, and in that,
Mm,
I wrote a lot of sermons. And
right.
sermon writing, it has a lot of similarities to writing. It's still writing, and that's where I
Right.
kind of developed a lot of muscles for writing and writing
Yeah.
consistently, whether I felt like it or not. Um, but then I just had basically finally had a message that I really wanted to say, and I was desperate enough to get something done in my life. I was just very kind of a place where I just kind of discouraged, and desperation is a great motivator. Um, and so from there, I wrote the book that was traditionally published, and that took several years. I had to teach myself how to write at that level. I had to teach myself about the industry, about agents, and blah 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 blah
Right.
blah. Then fast forward several years, that book came out, it was published. We had to close my church right around that time, right,
Mhm.
like within a week of when my book came out, and so we decided, let's travel the country. We packed up, sold our house, packed ours up in a minivan because
Right.
it's a time of transition. Drove around the country for 8 months,
Right. Oh,
including short Charlotte. Went through Charlotte.
okay.
Um, Spent about a week. We were up in the Raleigh Durham area for about 2 weeks, and then kind of
Yes.
did some trips from there. Um,
Right.
Anyways, came back from that trip and realized I don't want to be a pastor anymore. And there's plenty of jobs you can do just for the money, but pastoring is not one of them. You don't
No.
want a counselor who's doing it just for the money. You don't want pastors doing it just for the money. So I became a bartender so I could earn a
Yes.
living and keep writing, because at that point I really did want to write, and especially to tell stories. I spent almost 7 years writing a novel that still hasn't been published, but that was
Wow.
kind of like my MFA. Basically,
Right.
I learned how to write at a much higher level.
Yes.
COVID hit right around the time my novel was done, and all of a sudden I'm out of a job, or more so, the government's paying me not to work. So
Yeah.
I pivoted. Did one short project for a ghostwriting company, and
Hmm.
realized, oh, I can do this.
Right.
But you, as a novelist, like, you have all these voices, like, oh, I know how Leah talks, and how Leah's dad talks, and so ghostwriting is the same idea, except it's a real voice. You're writing in someone else's voice, and
Right.
from that, just opportunities came up, and just crazy opportunities, and so that's basically how I came into it. Never planned to do it, but
Yeah.
it ended up just be something I'm pretty good at, and I enjoy it. I get to write for a living.
Wow. Well, now you're working on your fourth memoir.
Is that what it is right now? I'm at fourth or fifth. Even from the point that we initially signed up to do this, and then by the time this airs, there'll be a couple more out. I mean, like, so yeah, like, one of my first ones was this old Christian saint, and her story of, man, I could go on about that. She was interesting to work with, but when you have someone who's 80 plus years old who's lived the life she has, you give her that, right?
Right.
And that was fun. I had well, that wasn't a memoir, but I had a client fly me out to
Mm,
Nigeria and Kenya at the beginning of last year for a book. That was a lot
mhm.
of fun. But right now I'm finishing one up for a gentleman in Florida, and then I'm just starting another one for a gentleman in the Midwest. He's the pastor of a historic Black church.
Mhm.
I have to be very careful. I can't say very much, because if I say much at all, I'll identify him. But
Right, right,
uh,
right.
his the it just, oh man, I had an amazing time hanging out with him. I just learned so much, especially
Wow.
some white kid from the Seattle area coming into this, to this church, and seeing the stuff that he's done, and uh,
Yeah.
it was a blast. So
Wow.
memoirs are fun. I love memoirs. Well, first of all, I love being a ghostwriter because I'm insatiably curious. I
Yes.
to know about anything. I mean, if I'm stuck in the subway for a little while, I start talking to someone about whatever it is they do. Chances are it's something I don't know anything about. So in this
Right.
case, actually, this gentleman that I was meeting with, his wife did something with medical research I didn't know anything about. So all of a sudden I have a new conversation. I'm learning something new. This is fun.
Right,
So
right,
that's
right, right.
fun. But memoirs are really cool because it's this meeting of nonfiction and fiction because you're using fiction techniques such as having an arc and all these sort of things to tell a
Mhm,
story.
mhm,
But then you're
mhm.
also being able to bring out lessons, which the preacher in me likes as well.
Mm,
And so
right.
they're just a lot of fun. So
Wow, wow. And if a person hired you, let's say,
mhm.
to write, say, a memoir, how much, how many hours would they have to give of themselves working with you?
Yeah, of course, it always varies, and it varies a lot by how much someone time that person wants to do. I've had some people who want very hands off, some people want to have more involvement. But
Mhm.
the initial thing is basically I do an on-site meeting for about 4 or 5 days because I just want to actually be in their spot. I can't tell a
Yes.
story if I haven't like felt that. Why that's so to go to Nigeria was vital for the work I was doing because I've never been to Africa before. I couldn't
Right.
write what she wanted me to write unless I knew the spot. Plus,
Right,
and
right,
then just face to face, Zoom is definitely better than phone, but still it's not the same. So
right.
I walk away from those with like between 20 and 40 hours worth of interviews all recorded, and then I have a program I use that transcribes them all.
Yes.
So
Yes.
there's that initial time commitment, and from there, it's usually a couple hours a week.
Right.
Where I'll write. Well, first I go through all those notes, then I create an outline, do some back and forth. There's a lot of initial stuff, initial ground paving, like let's figure out what the purpose of the theme of this book is. What are you really trying to say? Because a memoir is different from an autobiography in that autobiography is here's my life A to B or A to Z. Memoir is here's this portion of my life I want to explain.
Mhm.
And so then you have to kind of make sure you understand you're both in agreement about what that portion is or that theme, that item. Um, but from there, it's like it's usually gonna be a couple hours a week of like, okay, I write an outline, let's talk about it. I've
Right.
written a couple chapters, let's talk about it. Um,
Yes. Yes, yes.
but yeah, so it's hard to say exactly, but that kind of gives a
Mhm.
good rule of thumb. Say
Right.
like,
Well, it definitely would
yeah,
be pretty much an immersive experience.
yeah,
It's not something that you can. I know you said some people like to be a little bit more hands-on or whatever have you, but it's definitely one that's an immersive experience.
yeah. And it's the interesting thing that I would say all of my memoir clients have said is or indicate that when you tell your story, you don't realize what's compelling about your own story a lot of times. And so
Right.
it takes meeting with someone else and sometimes able to put pieces together. And that again has to do with this dyslexic mind that puts pieces together that other people don't see. So the
Right.
Florida client, as we're going through this stuff, and he's talking about his childhood and this and this and this and stuff about his
Mhm.
dad. I left his dad, but all this stuff. I said, so your dad's he's a tragic figure. He was a very smart man, but circumstances prohibited him from getting a job that fit his brain, and so he
Yes.
was doing like menial work, which is not menial. It's important. I do believe work is important, but if your brain is firing 90 miles an hour all the time and you're sweeping floors, you're gonna go crazy.
Right.
And and for
Exactly.
he was my client was like basically he's like he took a moment to think about it, like yeah, my dad was a tragic figure, and he never saw that. And so
Yeah.
sometimes there's a little bit of almost a therapist aspect to being
Yeah.
a ghostwriter in these situations.
Yes. Yes, I can definitely see that. Definitely, it just brings about things that people aren't really thinking about that other people would be interested in. So I think that's a perfect thing that you have to be on the lookout if ghostwriting is something that you want to do. So,
Mhm.
with all of that said, Josh, it's been wonderful talking with you. I think the audience will get a lot out of listening to this interview. We will have all of your contact information and the podcast show notes, as well as the video description box on the YouTube channel. Josh,
Yeah.
thank you so much for spending some time with me today.
Well, likewise, thank you. Thank you for letting me talk about myself. That's always fun. Normally, I'm letting other people talk about themselves, so it's kind of nice to be in the other seat.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you so much.